Well, some of you may be aware that I did a kind of a short series of videos on book recommendations. And in the second one of that series, I focused and talked about the Diamond Sutra, which, of course, is one of the most amazing writings that humans have ever come up with, ever, in my own opinion. And of course, there are many who agree with that. By the way, I was planning to make a trip to London, but it kind of got aborted because of the pandemic. And one of the things I was very much looking forward to was seeing the version of the Diamond Sutra that was discovered in a cave in Dongwang in China, which supposedly is the earliest dated printed book ever. I think it was 836 when it was put together. And it was put together, a friend of mine shared with me the fact that it was put together in such a way that the sponsor of it, the person, presumably a rich person, who contracted with someone to create it in terms of the calligraphy and the printing of it, etc., that they specifically said within the book that it could be reprinted by others. In other words, there was no, so to speak, copyright kind of consideration because that person wanted this scripture, this doctrine, this teaching, this profound, amazing teaching to spread. But anyway, I think it's held in the British Library. And I did see a video about it recently where they had to do an incredible amount of sort of reconstruction of it very carefully in order to get it into better shape. Because when it was first discovered, I think back in the early 20th century, they basically used glue to put some of the pieces of it together, which then the problem more recently was how do you get the glue off? But anyway, that's another kind of story. But within this particular video, a subscriber asked me, he said, "What are your thoughts on Huang Po? And have you reached an enlightenment state? Is the state real or just a natural phenomena of no mind without conceptual thought?" Well, I thought that was a pretty amazing question, the latter part of it. Huang Po, I honestly hadn't had that much exposure to at that time. But what I said was, from doing a quick review of Huang Po's positions, I think he had it right in terms of his rejection of any dualism and his insight that all seeking is in vain. Those are two most important concepts within Buddhism and within mystical spirituality in general, namely this idea of non-dual consciousness, where there's the ability to have a perception that transcends the ordinary way that the thinking mind operates in terms of breaking things down into this versus that. And of course, the idea of no attainment is so profound and meaningful because so much of scripture, so much of religious literature is oriented toward the idea of attaining, and Buddhism certainly is, as far as stages of the Bodhisattva, steps within the Eightfold Path, etc., etc. But again, at the end of the day, as it says in the Heart Sutra, which of course is a sibling, if you will, to the Diamond Sutra, there is no attainment. And that is why the Bodhisattva has no fear, because there's nothing to gain. So anyway, I said, I do not fundamentally disagree with his assertion that, quote, if you would only rid yourselves of the concepts of ordinary and enlightened, you would find that there is no other Buddha than the Buddha in your own mind, close quote. Getting rid of ordinary and enlightened. The idea, again, nirvana is samsara, form is void. These are profound and subtle kinds of insights that we find in Buddhism articulated in such a way that is really in many ways different than other religious traditions because it's so explicit. But anyhow, with respect to that, I said I don't fundamentally disagree with that assertion. But I said, that said, I think this is a premise that can be grossly misconstrued. In other words, when he says that there is no Buddha other than the Buddha in your own mind. I think that this is a premise that can be grossly misconstrued with ill effect, if a person thereby concludes that he or she is a Buddha and thus experiences some kind of ego trip. It brings to mind Ram Dass, Richard Alpert, in his book Be Here Now. I can picture it in my mind. There's a drawing in one of the pages of the book where there's this guy in a church, I think it was, sort of running down the aisle, I am God, I am God. And of course, the caption is, or the message from Ram Dass, yeah, you're God, and I'm God, and everybody's God. But again, this notion of original enlightenment or Buddha nature being manifested in the here and now, it can be misconstrued, and it can be food for the ego in terms of a person feeling somehow superior, or that he or she has attained something that is rather phenomenal and unique. So, if a person thereby concludes that he or she is a Buddha and thus experiences some kind of ego trip, then it can have ill effect. As you can see from my videos, I prefer to adopt a conceptual system that says, since seeking is in vain, we are best off relying on an other power for, quote, salvation. This results in a similar mind state, but with a greater degree of humility than equating one's own mind with Buddha. So no, I do not feel I have, quote, reached an enlightened state. I do think such is real, and that it can reasonably be described in exactly the phrase which you are offering here. Namely, the phrase he offered was, quote, a natural phenomena of no mind without conceptual thought. So again, I indicated that I thought that was real and could be described in the way that my listener indicated. But I went on to say, to experience this on a consistent basis each and every moment would be, in my view, Buddhahood. But who can do it, given the three poisons of greed, aversion, and ignorance? So this gets back to my premise that, for example, through meditation, through focusing on the breath, in and out, up and down, and sort of creating a mind state where if a sound occurs or a thought occurs, we can kind of maybe label it and let it go. And where we can perhaps get in touch with something that I think is within each of us, namely prajna or wisdom, that to put it in maybe some concrete terms, can bubble up. It can bubble up, and we can have a glimpse, an insight into non-dual reality. But again, to have a glimpse is one thing, but to experience it on a consistent basis over the course of time, over the course of many weeks, months, years, that would be, to my mind, Buddhahood. And I just don't think anybody in this kind of human body with these kinds of limitations of greed, anger, or aversion, and also ignorance in the sense that many of us, or most of us, or almost all of us, are locked into this feeling and experience that we are a separate being, whereas in the non-dual perspective, there's a great interconnectedness. That who can do it is what I say. I said again, who can do it given the three poisons? So I certainly can't do it, and in that sense, and for that reason, I say I'm not enlightened, but I do have the belief system and the imaginings to the effect that when I die, I will be reborn in the Pure Land of Amida Buddha, and at that time will become immediately enlightened and have the wisdom and compassion to come back and help others in ways that I can't at this time even imagine. Namo Amida Butsu. Namo Amida Butsu. Namo Amida Butsu.